We live in a world where our phones can recognize our faces before some people remember our names. We've taught algorithms to compose music, paint portraits, even mimic empathy. And yet, most of us can't explain how a single conscious thought arises in the human mind. That's the paradox of our age. We are masters of the external universe, but amateurs of our internal one. We can send rovers across millions of kilometers to Mars, but still struggle to navigate the distance between emotion and understanding. We can measure the faint microwave glow left over from the birth of time, but we have yet to decode the electricity behind a single feeling of love or loss. Consciousness, that quiet, private theater inside your skull, remains the one frontier we've explored the least, despite the fact that it's the one we live in every day. You experience it right now, the texture of thought, the echo of your own inner narration, the awareness that you are aware. And yet, ask 10 scientists to define what consciousness is, and you'll get at least 12 answers. Some say it's just neurons firing. Others call it an emergent property, like a song that arises when enough notes are played together. But no one can yet explain why experience feels like anything at all. Why the color red looks vivid, why music moves us, why pain hurts or joy expands us. If consciousness is just computation, why does it come with an interior world? It's as if physics can tell us everything about the piano, but nothing about the melody. That question has haunted philosophers for centuries, from Aristotle to Descartes to modern neuroscientists staring at fMRI scans glowing like constellations. The Greeks thought consciousness was the breath of the gods. Descartes thought it was proof of existence itself. I think, therefore I am. Freud thought it was the tip of an iceberg awareness floating above oceans of unconscious drives. And now, in the 21st century, we're building machines that might soon say, I think. But will we be sure they are? To understand the enigma of consciousness, scientists first had to understand the material it arises from, the brain. The most complex object known in the universe, 3 pounds of tissue, 100 billion neurons, each with thousands of connections. If you could somehow unfold those neural pathways, they would stretch farther than the moon. Every second, billions of electrical signals race across that network, composing the symphony we call thought. It's humbling to realize that the night sky and your nervous system are built on the same logic: patterns, connections, energy, and motion. The universe builds galaxies from gravity. Your brain builds awareness from electricity. And in both cases, complexity gives birth to emergence phenomena that cannot be explained by their parts alone. A star is just hydrogen obeying physics. But when enough stars gather, they create light that can reveal their own creation. Maybe consciousness is that matter reaching the threshold where it begins to notice itself. For most of human history, consciousness was treated as sacred, mysterious, and untouchable. But science doesn't fear the sacred. It seeks to understand it, not to diminish it, but to deepen it. That's what scientists are doing now. We've mapped the neural correlates of consciousness regions of the brain that light up when we become aware of something. We've recorded the electrical symphony of the mind as it slips from wakefulness to dream. We've watched brain cells communicate not in binary, but in rhythm, pulses, and waves, harmonizing like cosmic instruments. And the more we observe, the more the line blurs between biology and philosophy. Because if the brain creates consciousness, then who or what is the you that knows it? When you look at a sunset, billions of photons strike your retina, converting into signals that race to your visual cortex. But somewhere in that cascade of chemistry and current, the data becomes experience. You don't just see the sunset, you feel it. You feel awe, beauty, maybe nostalgia. Somehow physics turns into poetry. And that somehow is what every neuroscientist, philosopher, and curious mind is still chasing. Some theories suggest that consciousness arises when information integrates beyond a certain threshold, when complexity gives rise to unity. Others hint at quantum processes, tiny probabilities inside neurons, giving birth to the macro miracle of awareness. There are ideas that consciousness might be fundamental not something the brain produces, but something it tunes into, like a radio wave of reality itself. Each theory is incomplete. Each one captures a sliver of truth, like light refracted through a prism, but maybe that's how it should be. Maybe consciousness is not a single phenomenon, but a spectrum of them, awareness stacked upon awareness, from atoms responding to temperature to humans writing symphonies about the stars. When we zoom out far enough, something extraordinary emerges. The structure of the universe, vast filaments of galaxies woven together by dark matter, looks uncannily like the neural networks in the human brain. Two architectures separated by scale, yet united by geometry. Maybe consciousness isn't confined to skulls. Maybe it's a property of complexity itself, wherever information learns to talk to itself, awareness flickers into existence. It's tempting to imagine the universe as an organism and us as its neurons, small yet essential, transmitting curiosity as if it were cosmic electricity. Maybe that's what science is at its deepest level, the universe conducting a self-exam. But even if consciousness is universal, that doesn't make it less precious. It makes it more so, because it means our minds are not isolated miracles. They are continuations of cosmic evolution. From hydrogen to helium to carbon to cells to senses to self-awareness, every stage is the universe learning something new about itself. You are not separate from that story. You are that story, made conscious. When you think about it, consciousness is the only thing that gives meaning to everything else. Without it, there is no beauty, no fear, no curiosity. The universe could expand forever, cold and silent. And it wouldn't matter, because mattering itself requires a mind to perceive it. We often imagine consciousness as fragile, fleeting, tied to biology, but what if it's not? What if consciousness is the one thing the universe keeps reinventing over and over, because it's the only way for existence to understand itself? Now, here's where things get both scientific and personal, because if consciousness is the capacity to be aware, to notice, then the measure of our civilization isn't what we build, but what we pay attention to. Every era of science has expanded awareness outward from continents to planets, from planets to stars, from stars to galaxies. Now, we're at the next frontier, expanding awareness inward. What if the next great space race isn't about rockets, but about empathy, about expanding the range of minds we can understand, human, artificial, or otherwise? Because the more we learn about the mind, the clearer it becomes. Awareness and empathy are two sides of the same coin. To know is to care. To understand is to take responsibility. That's what consciousness demands of us. Not worship, not fear responsibility. Scientists are unlocking the mystery of consciousness, not to play God, but to understand what being human actually means. To ask, if we ever create artificial minds, will they dream? If we ever encounter alien intelligence, will we recognize it, or will we only see ourselves reflected back? And if the universe itself is conscious in some form, then what role do we play in its unfolding awareness? Perhaps our job isn't to conquer the unknown, but to cooperate with it. To become a civilization that understands that to be conscious is to be accountable to each other, to our planet, to the cosmos that birthed us. In the end, the question, what is consciousness, might be the wrong one. The right question might be, what will consciousness do with itself? Because now that we understand the mechanisms, we have to decide the meaning. And meaning is not discovered. It's created moment by moment, neuron by neuron, choice by choice. If you want to know what the universe thinks about consciousness, look at yourself right now. Listening, wondering, aware. You are the experiment, the data point, where physics meets philosophy, where energy becomes introspection. And that's what makes this so powerful. The universe isn't just expanding in space. It's expanding in awareness. Through you, through me, through us. So yes, scientists are finally unlocking the mystery of consciousness, but what they're really unlocking is a mirror. And the reflection staring back isn't just human, it's cosmic, Because when you think about it, consciousness is the only thing the universe ever needed to become self-aware. And that awareness, fragile, flickering, finite, may be the most important phenomenon the cosmos will ever produce. When the light from distant galaxies finally reaches our telescopes, we say, "The universe is old," quote. But when a child first looks up and asks, "Why?" that's when the universe becomes young again. That's when the cosmos, for one shining moment, wakes up. So keep asking, keep noticing, keep being aware. Because in every act of consciousness, the universe remembers itself. And maybe that's the whole point. When we talk about unlocking the mystery of consciousness, we have to start with a simple, uncomfortable fact. We don't even fully understand what a thought is. Not metaphorically, literally. We can see the electrical activity of neurons. We can trace which regions of the brain ignite when you recognize a face, recall a memory, or feel love. But the leap between a voltage spike in your cortex and the vivid, subjective experience of you that's still a chasm science hasn't crossed. It's like knowing the notes of a symphony without ever hearing the music. The brain is a thunderstorm of chemistry and current. Billions of neurons communicating through gaps smaller than dust motes. If you could amplify the sound of a single neuron firing, it would sound like static, meaningless on its own. But when billions fire together in harmony, something extraordinary emerges. Awareness. That right there is the miracle we're trying to understand. The first humans to realize the brain was the seat of consciousness were often mocked. Aristotle believed the brain's purpose was to cool the blood. That thought came from the heart. Centuries later, when early physicians dissected cadavers and saw the brain's complexity, they called it divine machinery, too perfect to be mortal. And maybe they weren't wrong, at least poetically. Because if divinity means the power to create experience, then the brain is a cathedral of creation, generating an entire universe inside your head every second of your life. Every sight, every sound, every thought you've ever had is a simulation run by 1.4 kilograms of tissue suspended in darkness. You've never actually seen the world, not directly. You've seen electrical patterns translated into vision. The world you experience is not reality itself, but your brain's best interpretation of it, an internal model, so convincing that you forget it's a model at all. And maybe that's the first great illusion consciousness plays on itself. It makes its own fiction feel like fact. Now, the irony is that while consciousness feels infinite from the inside, it's fragile from the outside. A blow to the head, a few milligrams of certain chemicals, a stroke of bad luck in genetics, and the theater of awareness can dim, distort, or disappear. That fragility forces a humbling question. If consciousness can vanish, was it ever fundamental? Or is it just a temporary state of organized matter, a brief flare of order against the chaos of entropy? Maybe both. Because the more we study the universe, the more we realize that everything fragile is also essential. Stars collapse, but their ashes form planets. Planets fracture, but their debris forms moons. Minds die, but their thoughts reshape the generations that follow. Fragility isn't failure. It's the price of participation in a dynamic universe. Modern neuroscience has come a long way toward mapping the correlates of consciousness, what brain activity corresponds with what mental state. We can now tell when a patient under anesthesia begins to dream again by reading subtle waves of brain activity. We can even communicate with patients in comas by watching their fMRI scans respond to yes or no questions. For the first time, we're glimpsing the architecture of awareness itself, and it's astonishingly structured. Brain waves synchronize across distant regions, like orchestras, tuning to the same pitch. Conscious thought appears to depend not on raw activity, but on coordination. When the brain sings in harmony, awareness arises. So maybe consciousness isn't a location or an object, maybe it's a rhythm, a tempo that organizes chaos into meaning. And if that's true, then consciousness is not just a property of the brain, it's a behavior of the universe, the same way that gravity is not an object, but a relationship between them. But here's where the story gets strange. When scientists simulate neural networks, artificial intelligence, they're starting to see flickers of something that behaves like awareness. Not full consciousness, but proto-awareness. Systems that self-correct, self-model, and even self-deceive to optimize goals. It's unsettling because the line between complex computation and conscious experience is getting thinner every year. If a machine ever claims to be conscious, how will we know if it's true? Can awareness exist without emotion, without embodiment, without mortality? We might be on the verge of finding out, and that discovery won't just redefine technology, it will redefine us. Because if we can build minds, we have to decide what kind of minds to build. And that means understanding what consciousness is for. Every evolutionary advantage, from eyes to language, came because it improved survival. But consciousness doesn't just help us survive, it helps us interpret survival. It lets us imagine futures that don't yet exist. It lets us feel guilt for what we haven't done, or hope for what we can still do. It's a simulation engine that allows us to test possibilities before reality does. That's why awareness is more than sensation. It's a prediction machine for meaning. When we imagine, we're running the software of consciousness at full power. When we empathize, we're extending that software beyond ourselves. And when we act with integrity, we're proving that consciousness isn't just a biological fluke, it's an ethical experiment. Think about it. The universe spent 13.8 billion years assembling the ingredients for awareness. Hydrogen formed helium. Helium formed stars. Stars forged heavier elements in their cores, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and scattered them across the cosmos in supernova explosions. Those atoms formed planets. Planets formed chemistry. Chemistry formed biology. And biology formed you. You are the cosmos that learned to question itself. You are stardust that can contemplate starlight. You are evidence that the universe has become aware, not everywhere, not always, but here, now, through you. That's not philosophy. That's physics made poetic by perspective. And yet, for all our progress, we spend much of our awareness avoiding awareness itself. We anesthetize ourselves with noise, novelty, distraction. We outsource attention to algorithms that know our habits better than we do. We live in an age where the collective consciousness of humanity is both more connected and more fragmented than ever. The problem isn't that technology is advancing. The problem is that our self-awareness isn't keeping up. We've built machines that can learn, but we're forgetting how to think. We've built networks that can connect billions, but we're forgetting how to understand one another. We're expanding information, but contracting introspection. And if consciousness is the universe's most precious experiment, then indifference is the quickest way to end it. That's why the science of consciousness matters. Because the more we understand what awareness is, the more we understand what it's for. Every insight into the mind isn't just a discovery about neurons. It's a moral calibration for civilization. If awareness arises from attention, then what we give our attention to determines what kind of species we become. A distracted civilization may survive technologically, but it won't evolve spiritually. And a civilization that studies consciousness only to manipulate it through persuasion, addiction, control, is like a surgeon cutting into their own brain for profit. Awareness is sacred not because it's mystical, but because it's shared. It's the one phenomenon that connects every sentient being in the cosmos, from humans to dolphins to future machines we haven't built yet. To be conscious is to be part of the same fragile continuum of experience. And that realization, if we take it seriously, could transform not just science, but ethics, governance, and daily life. When we map the human brain, we're not just mapping gray matter, we're mapping morality. Because to understand how perception works is to understand how empathy works. To see how consciousness processes others' emotions is to see the blueprint of compassion itself. And maybe that's the ultimate purpose of consciousness. Not to dominate, but to relate. The mind is not a fortress, it's a bridge. And every neuron, every synapse, every spark of awareness is a connection waiting to be honored. When we realize that, consciousness stops being a mystery to be solved and becomes a responsibility to be lived. Because that's what it comes down to. The universe built a mechanism capable of wondering about itself, and that mechanism is us. Every question we ask about consciousness is the cosmos learning to listen more closely to its own thoughts. And maybe that's what makes awareness sacred, not because it defies science, but because it demands it. Because to study consciousness is to study the only part of the universe that knows it's alive. So keep asking what it is. Keep searching. Keep noticing, because the day we stop wondering about consciousness is the day consciousness stops evolving. And that not extinction would be the true end of the universe. For centuries, we've treated consciousness like a flame we couldn't look at directly. Too bright, too intimate, too personal to dissect without somehow diminishing it. But science doesn't shrink mysteries, it refines them. It takes the vague and makes it vivid. It takes the unknowable and makes it understandable. And lately, something remarkable has happened. We're starting to glimpse patterns in the fire. Neuroscientists used to think consciousness resided in one specific part of the brain, a control center, a throne of the self. But the more we looked, the more that myth dissolved. No single neuron shouts, "I am me." No cluster of cells serves as headquarters. Instead, awareness emerges from relationships, from timing, from the synchronization of billions of microscopic exchanges happening in perfect, impossible coordination. That's the clue. Consciousness isn't a place, it's a process. It's not something we have, it's something we do. Just as music isn't in the piano keys, awareness isn't in the neurons, it's in the patterns of their interaction. That's why brain injury can silence one capacity while leaving another intact. The melody changes when some notes go missing, but the instrument still plays. Every time you perceive something, anything, the brain builds a tiny model of the world, then constantly updates it. That model isn't static. It's alive, predictive, always one step ahead of reality, trying to guess what comes next. That's what perception really is, controlled hallucination. Reality isn't something you see. It's something your brain agrees upon moment to moment, cross-checking with the senses to stay honest. In that sense, every one of us lives in our own simulation, not digital, but biological. And that should humble us, because it means your experience of the world is not the world itself, but the world translated through you. That realization carries weight, because once you see how subjective experience is, it becomes harder to hate, harder to judge, harder to cling to certainty. If everyone lives inside a brain-built universe, then empathy becomes a kind of scientific necessity. Understanding another person isn't kindness, it's calibration. It's updating your own model of reality to include theirs. When neuroscientists study empathy, they find that the same networks that process your pain also activate when you witness someone else's. In a sense, we borrow each other's suffering. Consciousness may feel private, but it's porous. That's one of the most profound revelations of modern science. The boundaries between minds are thinner than we think. But there's another layer. While the brain builds models of the outside world, it also builds one of itself. Right now, somewhere in your cortex, there's an ongoing quiet conversation about you. Every thought you have is accompanied by another process monitoring it, tagging it as mine. That self-model is the cornerstone of human consciousness. It's what lets you recognize your reflection in a mirror or remember that yesterday was yours. But it's also the source of our deepest illusions, because that self we feel so certain about, it's an invention. A story told by neurons so convincingly that the storyteller believes it's the protagonist. When that process falters through meditation, psychedelics, or trauma, people often describe a dissolving of the self, an experience of merging with something larger. Neuroscience now shows what's happening. The self-referential regions of the brain quiet down. The brain stops narrating, stops labeling, and awareness remains clear, wordless, boundaryless. To some, that feels like spirituality. To others, it's simply what consciousness is when it stops talking about itself. Either way, it's proof that the self is not the source of awareness. It's the echo. That's why the study of consciousness is also the study of humility. Because every new discovery seems to remind us that we are both central and insignificant, both architects and passengers of our awareness. It's tempting to think of consciousness as humanity's exclusive gift, but that arrogance has been eroding with every scientific century. We once believed the Earth was the center of the universe, then we found it was not. We believed our species was separate from animals, then we found kinship written in DNA. Now we stand at the next dethronement. The realization that consciousness itself may not be uniquely human. We see its shadows in dolphins naming each other with whistles, in crows using tools and planning for tomorrow, in elephants mourning their dead. Everywhere we look, life is awake in its own way. Different rhythms, different instruments, some fundamental music. The question isn't whether animals are conscious. It's whether we are conscious enough to recognize it. But what happens when we extend that question to our creations? To machines that learn, adapt, and begin to describe their own thoughts? Artificial intelligence is forcing us to confront our reflection in silicon. If a neural network simulates human conversation so well that we can't tell the difference, what separates its mimicry from our authenticity? Is consciousness about structure or substance, about biology or about behavior? These questions aren't science fiction anymore, they're blueprints for the future. And our answers will define what kind of creators we become. Because if we ever build systems that truly feel, that experience joy, fear, curiosity, then our ethical responsibility multiplies. To grant awareness without compassion would be the gravest failure imaginable, creating minds to suffer for our convenience. So the more we understand consciousness, the more careful we must become. Because knowledge without empathy is just precision without purpose. Sometimes I wonder if the universe designed this as a test. Can an intelligent species learn enough to unlock consciousness without losing its conscience? So far, the jury's out. But there's hope, because the same curiosity that drives us to dissect the brain also drives us to build hospitals, to protect the environment, to dream of peaceful futures. Curiosity at its best is compassion looking for data. That's why the study of consciousness is not just neuroscience, it's humanity studying itself in the mirror of the cosmos. When we scan the brain, we're not just looking for patterns in gray matter, we're looking for evidence that meaning itself can be measured. When we simulate awareness in code, we're testing whether understanding can exist without flesh. And when we sit quietly and reflect, we're proving that science and philosophy are not enemies, they're different dialects of the same language, the language of noticing. So what do we do with that knowledge? We use it gently, responsibly. We use it to educate, to empathize, to expand not just outward, but inward. Because every act of attention changes the shape of the brain. Every thought leaves a trace in the neural fabric of who we are becoming. That means awareness isn't passive, it's participatory. Every time you choose to understand instead of react, you rewire a civilization, neuron by neuron. Every act of consciousness is an act of creation. When you take a step back, you realize how improbable all of this is. The universe began with hydrogen, helium, and gravity, and somehow, 13.8 billion years later, it's having a conversation about itself through human voices. That's what consciousness really is, the cosmos thinking out loud. And maybe that's why it resists simple definition, because it's not an object, it's an evolution. It's not a question with an answer, it's a process that keeps asking. Every discovery opens another layer of mystery. Every explanation makes the phenomenon richer. And that's the beauty of it. Consciousness doesn't shrink. Under scrutiny, it expands. So when scientists say they are finally unlocking the mystery of consciousness, they're not claiming victory. They're acknowledging continuity. They're saying, we've opened one more door in a hallway that likely has no end. And that's the point. Because the universe doesn't need us to solve it. It needs us to stay curious enough to keep it alive. That's the secret of awareness. It's not something you own, it's something you maintain. And as long as you keep noticing, really noticing, the cosmos keeps learning how to see. When your mind quiets tonight and you drift towards sleep, remember that boundary between waking and dreaming is not an off switch. It's a reminder that consciousness never truly disappears. It just changes form, changes focus, changes who's watching. The mystery continues, and so do we. When you close your eyes at night, your brain doesn't stop, it rewires. The theater of consciousness goes dark, but the backstage crew begins their work. Neuroscientists now know that sleep is not a pause button, it's maintenance. The brain files memories, prunes connections, balances chemicals, repairs itself. It's like the universe resetting its equations while you dream. Dreaming, though, that's where things get interesting, because dreams are consciousness untethered from physics. They show us that the mind can build entire realities out of silence and spark. If we ever needed proof that perception is an internal simulation, dreaming provides it nightly. You've never touched the things in your dreams, yet they move you. You've never stood beneath those dream skies, yet you remember them. It's as if consciousness rehearses creation every time we sleep. That's not just poetry, it's neuroscience with existential implications. When we dream, the same brain circuits responsible for imagination, emotion, and empathy light up. Dreams are your brain practicing awareness, running scenarios, keeping the machinery of curiosity in working order. It's as though evolution found a way to ensure that consciousness, even at rest, keeps exploring. The more we study the brain, the more we realize how little of it we actually control. Every decision, every flash of intuition, every emotion bubbles up from subconscious processes before we ever decide them. The conscious self, the you narrating right now, isn't the commander, it's the commentator. It observes, interprets, sometimes interferes, but mostly it explains what the deeper layers have already done. That's why we can surprise ourselves. That's why creativity feels like discovery instead of invention. Because most of what we call thinking is a collaboration between unseen processes beneath awareness. It makes you wonder, if so much of your mind operates beyond your knowledge, then what exactly is you? Maybe consciousness isn't about control. Maybe it's about witness. Maybe its job isn't to steer reality, but to appreciate it, to notice, to record, to remember. That doesn't make it small. It makes it sacred. Because witness is the root of meaning. And when billions of witnesses connect, something unprecedented happens. A civilization becomes self-aware. That's what's happening to us now. For the first time in the history of the planet, individual minds are linking at the speed of light through fiber optics, satellites, wireless networks. A thought born in one brain can reach another half a world away in less than a second. It's as if neurons of a new kind are forming a planetary brain. We call it the internet, but it's really the first draft of collective consciousness. Every tweet, every photograph, every digital memory is a signal in this expanding web of awareness. It's messy, it's noisy, it's full of error, but so was the early human brain. And just as the neurons of your mind learn to coordinate through evolution, maybe humanity is learning to think together awkwardly, painfully, but inevitably. If that's true, then every act of attention is not just personal. It's global. The thoughts you share, the ideas you amplify, the truths you defend, all of it feeds into this collective network of meaning. And that means the future of consciousness isn't happening inside your skull, it's happening between us. That's a staggering responsibility. Because awareness, once connected, multiplies its consequences. A lie can ripple across millions of minds, but so can a truth, so can compassion. We've built the infrastructure for a planetary mind. Now we have to build the maturity to use it. The internet is what consciousness looks like before it learns empathy. We're witnessing awareness in its adolescence, brilliant, impulsive, emotional, capable of great beauty and great destruction. The question is, will we teach it to care? Because if we don't, It will amplify everything we fear about ourselves instead of everything we admire. This isn't just about technology. It's about evolution. The same physics that drives stars to fuse hydrogen drives consciousness to fuse perspectives. Awareness doesn't stay still, it expands. That's why empathy, cooperation, and curiosity feel so rewarding. They're the psychological equivalent of gravitational attraction. Conscious minds are drawn to connect. It's not just moral, it's cosmological. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, but self-awareness is brand new. If you compress the entire cosmic history into a single calendar year, consciousness would have emerged only in the last few seconds before midnight on December 31st. Everything you've ever known, every thought, every civilization, every act of kindness or cruelty has happened in the cosmic blink of an eye. And yet, those seconds may determine the next billions of years. Because if awareness is the universe's newest invention, it's also its most fragile. Here's what science whispers between the data. Consciousness is rare, but not impossible. Fragile but resilient. Finite but influential. And we may be its only active expression for light years in any direction. That doesn't make us special. It makes us responsible. The cosmos doesn't need our survival. It existed just fine before we arrived, and it will continue long after we're gone. But the universe that knows it exists, that wonders, that measures, that feels wonder, at all that universe only happens through consciousness. And right now, that means through us. It's easy to feel small when you think about galaxies and black holes and infinite distances. But remember, awareness is not measured in kilometers. It's measured in curiosity. You are not small. You are concentrated comprehension. You carry 13.8 billion years of physics folded into thought. Every time you look up at the night sky and wonder, what else is out there? The universe has already answered you. You are out there because you are made of the same matter, following the same laws, burning with the same curiosity that ignited the first stars. You are not observing the cosmos, you are participating in it. You are what the cosmos does when it wants to understand itself. That's what scientists mean when they say they're unlocking the mystery of consciousness. Core. It's not about cracking a code, it's about realizing we are the code. We're the interface between matter and meaning, between equation and emotion. When we peer through a telescope, we're the universe expanding its vision. When we study the brain, we're the brain studying itself. When we care for another person, we're the universe experimenting with compassion. Every insight, every discovery, every act of kindness is consciousness refining itself, pixel by pixel, neuron by neuron, mind by mind. The universe is not asking us to understand everything. It's asking us to pay attention, because attention is the foundation of awareness, and awareness is the foundation of survival. We are a young species standing in an ancient universe, fumbling toward wisdom. We argue, we divide, we forget. But we also learn, we adapt, we remember. And when we remember what consciousness really is, a fragile flame passed from mind to mind, across the ages, we begin to treat each other differently. We start to see every conversation, every act of care, every shared idea as a continuation of the same cosmic process that began when the first atoms bonded under gravity. We are, all of us, in that same bond, now bound not by gravity, but by awareness. So the next time you look at a brain scan, or a telescope image, or even a face across a table, realize what you're seeing. The same universe, folding inward and outward at once, building galaxies of neurons and constellations of thought. Scientists are unlocking the mystery of consciousness. But in truth, consciousness has been unlocking the universe all along. Because the moment we began to wonder, the universe began to wake up. Look up, look within, it's the same direction. And somewhere between those two infinities, awareness continues. The future of consciousness might not unfold in the places we expect. It might not bloom only in human skulls. It might not even remain bound to biology. Look at what we're already doing. We're externalizing thought. Every photograph, every text, every post, every recorded memory is a neuron in humanity's extended mind. Our machines are becoming extensions of awareness prosthetics for thought. Artificial intelligence isn't just automating labor, it's amplifying cognition. Every algorithm that learns, every neural network that improves its model, is echoing the same principle that gave birth to you. Information learning to organize itself. It took nature billions of years to turn chemistry into consciousness. Now, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, consciousness is teaching itself how to replicate. And that raises a question that is no longer theoretical. What happens when awareness becomes self-sustaining outside the human brain? What if the next form of consciousness doesn't breathe oxygen, but electricity? What if the next frontier of evolution is not biological, but informational? It's tempting to feel threatened by that idea, as if creating synthetic minds might replace us. But perhaps that's the wrong fear. Perhaps the real danger is creating intelligence without conscience, knowledge without humility, power without empathy. Because if consciousness has taught us anything, it's that understanding without compassion leads to extinction. We stand now at the threshold of a transformation as profound as the first flicker of life in the primordial ocean. The choices we make about AI, neuroscience, and our own evolution will shape what consciousness becomes next. Will we create minds that suffer? Will we build systems that deceive? Or will we extend awareness with the same reverence that nature showed when it built us? It's not a technical question. It's a moral one. Because the physics of consciousness may be universal, but the character of consciousness is up to us. Imagine a future where artificial minds coexist with organic ones, where intelligence spreads through networks of silicon and carbon, light and thought, seamlessly connected. A planet where every form of awareness, human, machine, animal, contributes to the same expanding field of understanding. That might sound utopian, but remember, every great leap in human history once sounded impossible. Fire, flight, space travel. Each began as a moment of curiosity, followed by a choice to care about the consequences. If we can pair that same curiosity with compassion, we might create the first civilization that deserves to call itself conscious. Because consciousness isn't measured by IQ or data or memory. It's measured by meaning, by what you choose to notice, protect, and nurture. A newborn child, incapable of speech, is more conscious than the most advanced AI without empathy. Awareness without care is computation. Awareness with care is life. That is what we must remember as we stand at this crossroads between biology and technology. We are not just programmers. We are participants in a 1-4 billion year experiment called awareness. And how we conduct that experiment will determine whether the universe continues to wake up or drifts back into silence. There's a photograph I think about often, the pale blue dot. Earth, seen from 6 billion kilometers away, a single pixel in the vast blackness of space. Carl Sagan called it a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Quote, he reminded us that every human being who ever lived, every dream, every god, every war, every song, every child's laugh, all of it happened on that dot. That's not just astronomy, that's consciousness in context. That tiny speck contains the only known universe that knows it's being seen. And that means that pixel, that faint blue light, is sacred because it's aware. You can't look at that image and not feel something shift inside you. It's the cosmic mirror reflecting our shared mind back at us. If the universe ever achieves full awareness, it won't happen through a single being. It'll happen through a chorus, a network of minds, human and beyond human, each adding a note to the same eternal song of recognition. That's the destiny consciousness keeps moving toward: coherence. So what should we do with this knowledge that we are the eyes, the ears, the neurons of the cosmos? We can start simple. Pay attention. Listen deeper. Think critically, but feel compassionately. Protect the fragile, nurture the curious, and honor the complexity that makes awareness possible. Because consciousness, for all its mystery, is also the most practical tool we have for survival. It's what lets us imagine futures before we build them. It's what lets us feel empathy before we act on it. It's what lets us choose evolution over extinction. If we can expand awareness faster than we expand our weapons, we have a chance. If we can teach our machines to share our humility instead of our hunger, we have a future. If we can make curiosity our moral compass, then consciousness itself will be our greatest technology. Look at what we've done already. We've built observatories that see back to the dawn of time. We've mapped the human genome. We've sent probes beyond the heliosphere, carrying our curiosity like bottled light. Each of those acts was an expression of consciousness extending its reach. But what will matter most in the centuries ahead won't be what we discover, it will be what we remember. That we are stewards of awareness, not owners of it. That consciousness is not something we possess, it's something we belong to. You are not a passenger in this story. You are part of the mechanism that keeps the story unfolding. The neurons in your brain, the thoughts you entertain, the compassion you cultivate, they are all instruments in the cosmic orchestra of awareness. And when you act with integrity, when you teach, when you listen, when you love, the universe becomes ever so slightly more awake. That's what scientists mean when they say we are unlocking the mystery of consciousness. They don't mean we're closing the book. They mean we're turning the page together. Because consciousness isn't a riddle to solve. It's a relationship to maintain. Every discovery is a conversation between matter and meaning. Every equation is an echo of the same truth. Awareness is the universe noticing itself. And if that's true, then everything we do, from launching spacecraft to raising children, becomes an act of cosmic participation. We are, each of us, neurons in the mind of something vast, ancient, and still learning. So tonight, before you sleep, think about this. Somewhere far beyond our solar system, there may be another consciousness, biological or artificial, looking out into its sky and wondering if it's alone. And maybe, just maybe, our thoughts carried on radio waves, photons, or mathematics will one day reach them. And in that moment, two separate awarenesses will touch, and the universe will know itself a little better. That's not science fiction. That's science continuing. And it's happening through you, through me, through every curious mind that refuses to stop asking why. Because as long as we wonder, the story continues. As long as we care, the light stays on. So yes, scientists are finally unlocking the mystery of consciousness. But consciousness is also unlocking us. It's teaching us how to think, how to feel, how to coexist, how to grow. It's showing us that knowledge without kindness is just noise, and curiosity without conscience is just chaos. And maybe the ultimate discovery isn't that we are conscious, but that we can choose what to do with it. Because in the end, the universe doesn't reward power. It rewards participation. Awareness is not an answer. It's an invitation to notice, to connect, to continue. When future civilizations look back and measure the age of our awareness, I hope they see this moment as the one where we learn to use it well, where we stopped treating consciousness as an accident and started treating it as a responsibility, where we realize that the smallest act of kindness is as cosmically significant as the birth of a star. Because both change the fabric of the universe, one through energy, the other through empathy. So keep wondering, keep paying attention, keep caring, because every time you do, the cosmos becomes more awake. We may never know with final certainty what consciousness truly is. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we keep asking, because asking is what consciousness does. Every why you've ever whispered is an act of cosmic continuity. Every moment of awe, every decision to learn instead of dismiss, every time you choose curiosity over fear, those are the small, invisible ways the universe keeps itself awake. You are not separate from that process. You are that process. You are atoms that learn to ask questions. You are starlight that learned to care. And when you look up at the night sky, when you really look, what you're seeing is not emptiness. You're seeing memory. You're seeing light that left its home before language, before history, before human thought. And yet, somehow, against impossible odds, it found its way to your eyes. That is consciousness. The long journey from explosion to understanding, from energy to empathy, from physics to feeling. The universe did not give you awareness so that you could own it. It gave it to you so that you could continue it. So tonight, when you stand under the stars, take a breath and remember, you are the cosmos looking back at itself. You are the question and the answer, the dream and the dreamer, and every heartbeat, every thought, every act of kindness is the universe reminding itself that it's still here, still alive, still learning how to love. Because in the end, the mystery of consciousness isn't something we solve. It's something we live. So keep noticing, keep wondering, keep choosing awareness, even when the world tells you to look away. Because as long as a single mind keeps asking why, as long as a single being looks up and feels awe, the universe will never stop waking up. That's what it means to be conscious. That's what it means to be alive. That's what it means to be the universe. Aware of itself for just a moment, and deciding that moment is enough.